Welcome to Endurance Capital. The theme of this third episode is the most universal and the most avoided: pain. The kind that shows up at mile 18 of an Ironman marathon or year 3 of a startup, when you've gone too far to turn back and nowhere close to where you are trying to go. The question isn't if it comes, but how you choose to meet it. Because in endurance and entrepreneurship, pain is not optional, but suffering might be. Joining me today is Mirinda Carfrae, Ironman Hall of Famer, 4 times Ironman World Champion, and one of the fiercest runners in the sport's history. Ian O'Brien, former USA Olympic triathlon coach, currently elite triathlon coach, and Tim Guilliams, founder and CEO of Healx.ai. Tim is building deep tech solutions with AI for rare diseases in the confluence of computer science and biology. Before we get started, a quick thanks to our sponsor, Stride Health, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. You can find more about them on www.getstride.com. Today, we are building a biological awareness system that you can actually use. How to understand your internal signals, measure what matters, intervene early, and extend performance over decades. I'm Ignacio Garcia, global early stage investor and endurance triathlete, and this is Endurance Capital. Joining me today is Mirinda Carfrae, Ironman Hall of Famer, 4 times Ironman World Champion, and one of the fiercest runners in the sport's history. Hi, Mirinda. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ignacio. Good to be here.
And with us is also Ian O'Brien, already known for the audience in previous episodes. He is the former USA Olympic triathlon coach and currently elite triathlon coach. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks again for having me, Ignacio. It's a pleasure to be here.
And also we've got Tim Guilliams, a star founder and CEO of Healx.ai. Tim is building deep tech solutions with AI for rare diseases in the confluence of computer science and biology. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Ignacio.
And for all of you, I'm Ignacio Garcia, global early stage investor, endurance athlete, and this is Endurance Capital. Let's get into it, guys. So we are being honest about the cost today, the quiet pain of mile 18 into an Ironman marathon and year 3 in a startup, and the discipline of turning that pain into progress rather than damage. Today, we are not glamorizing, we are unpacking it. The goal? Learn how to reframe it, navigate it, and extract meaning from it. Rinny, let's start with you. I would like to talk about the mental game when you are coming from behind. Tell us a memorable race when you were behind in the swim and the bike and still won. In that moment, what kept you chasing when it hurt and the odds were ugly? What was the single thought that shut down the panic?
Yeah, Ignacio, pretty much throughout my whole career, swim was not my forte or my strongest leg. So pretty much every single triathlon I ever did, I was chasing from behind. So sort of down out of the swim onto the bike, and the run was really the place where I had to dig into the pain and accept the pain and push through. But for me, it was a positive sort of place to be, because the race for me just got better and better as the day went on. I think, the biggest one that stands out is the World Championships, the biggest stage in our sport in 2014. I was around 13 and a half or 14 minutes down from the leader, Daniela Riff, who's been on your show before as well, in her rookie year. And I was defending Ironman champion, so a lot of pressure going into that race. I found myself off the bike, 13 and a half, 14 minutes down from Daniela. I felt like a failure in that moment. But I sort of reframed, my goals. I sort of, instead of, win at all cost, it was, okay, let's just do the best you can in every single moment that you're in and focus on the here and now. Of course, managing pain throughout that whole process, but reframing it from, I have to win this race, and focusing so much on that end goal to being in the moment was really the key for me that day, and ended up running the fastest ever marathon I'd run. fastest ever marathon at that point that had ever been run in Kona, and made up the biggest deficit that had ever been made up in World Championship, and won that world title in 2014. So that's the biggest one that stands out to me in my career, and finding that limit, or that making pain almost your friend. When you're pushing up against that pain barrier and finding that sweet spot, that's where the magic happens. And I think as an athlete, you're just constantly finding that limit. Again, I think pain, while you don't love it, it becomes kind of a companion.
Ian, in that context, how do you teach athletes to read pain as information, distinguishing productive suffering from danger and failure?
Yeah, that's an interesting phrase, distinguishing productive suffering from danger whilst training. So it's important to kind of understand and have a system in place so that not only as a coach, but as an athlete, because you're ultimately in control of your own destiny, you actually do the right things and set the conditions for success. So a lot of it's to do with being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because endurance sports, especially when you push yourself at the higher level, it can get very uncomfortable. But the difference between that and going to the point where you're collectively, building fatigue, which could, turn to overtraining or having an injury, is pretty critical that you get that right. So it should be uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be dire. And there's a big difference between how your body feels and how your body is reacting in terms of how you're breathing in your lungs. So when you're breathing and it's very difficult, that's less of a danger compared to how you feel. So sharp pains, aches, and all that kind of thing do actually have a huge effect. So we have to be very, very mindful of that. So what I like to do is I kind of teach pain as information, like it's feedback from what you get from this training stimulus which is prescribed. So I use kind of like a traffic light system, which is green, amber, and red. Very basic, but it makes it super, super easy for an athlete to dial in exactly what they should and shouldn't be doing. So for green is grow or go. So keep pushing, normal training, discomfort, muscle burn, fatigue. This is good. This is what adaptation is. This is what you want. You want to have this, but you've got to be careful. So I would also instruct whilst you're in that environment, as long as it's in line with what we're trying to achieve in the session, is stay here, be uncomfortable, and push through, maintain, basically. The next one's amber. So we've got to maintain caution. And if we need to modify, then we will. But ultimately, it's still going to allow us to progress and develop our fitness levels. So that might come across as a dull ache, lingering soreness that lasts beyond training, slightly above normal levels. And, it's a warning to modify, if not stop. But ideally, we don't want to stop. So we've just got to be super, super careful. But we're paying close attention at this stage. So the instructions I would give for that are ease up, check your form, don't push this too hard, but don't stop completely, and we'll adapt the load a little bit. But what's really important is what we do afterwards. The recovery part of this is critical so that consecutive sessions don't have the same effect and therefore build too much fatigue. And then the last one is a red light. So this is danger and stop. So sharp stabbing, shooting pains in any specific spot in the body. Instability, which is basically pain that forces you to change your movement. So, for example, like a limp, or you're guarding something, or you're fatiguing, or your cadence is slowing down. Like these indicators, for me as a coach, I'm looking at that, and I'll make some changes in the session or stop it at that stage to make sure nothing bad happens. So these things kind of signal potential tissue damage, and we want to avoid that at all costs. So in summary, training stress is hugely important. So training stress plus recovery equals super compensation and therefore growth. But we must recover, and we mustn't go over prescription. There's countless times when I've worked with athletes that have gone too far and end up hurting themselves or burning themselves out because they're not accountable and staying within this traffic light system. So you must recover, and you mustn't go over that prescription. In racing, though, staying on the plan is also hugely important. And Mirinda will be able to come up with, I'm probably sure, so many examples of times when that's actually come up. So sticking to the plan, especially for long course, going too hard early on, fighting people and battling on the bike will have an effect later on in the run. So stay on your plan. And ultimately, the athlete is in control. My job as a coach is to develop leaders, i.e. athletes themselves, so they're in control and have all the skills and the mindset, the strategy and the tactics to be able to execute and set the conditions for their success. But ultimately, they're accountable for those decisions. My job is obviously to be around them and make sure we guide them effectively.
Yeah, it seems that reading those signals before you actually burn out is the key. And that's what makes I think, the difference between a winner and a champion again. We're going to be talking about burnout in future episodes, but over to you, Tim. Deep tech applied to drug discovery is really endurance, isn't it? And the wins and breakthroughs take time. Pioneering the next generation of AI technologies takes time, and seeing patient impact in the clinic takes even longer, right? How do you stay motivated or focused and sharp when the day-to-day wins are not so visible?
Yeah, thank you, Ignacio. So yeah, for us, it's really, and for me, but also for the team, the rare disease mission of the company that kind of makes the long game and the day-to-day basically meaningful, enjoyable, and timeless in a way. And so most people are not familiar with this, but you have 10,000 rare diseases. 95% don't have an approved treatment, and that impacts more than 400 million patients worldwide. And so if you want to have an idea of size, that's larger than the population size of the United States. So try to imagine it. And then half of those are children. And so working, with those patients and families together, with foundations, with charities to try and find a treatment is incredibly rewarding. And we also hire rare disease parents to lead programs, etc. And so that really helps to basically transform the pain and the up and downs into kind of purpose, into patient impact, and it doesn't feel like a job. And so I'm feeling incredibly grateful that I'm able to spend my time doing this, and with the team trying to apply the latest AI technologies and science to have an impact and make a difference for the world. And then the challenge comes from a founder perspective. Typically, you don't have a coach and an infrastructure and support, and so you get so obsessed by what you're doing that you push the boundaries too far, and you end up burning out. And I know we'll touch a bit about this in a bit later.
Yeah, let me ask you all a question. Rinny, if you want to go first, when does pain become performance? Is that identifiable when you're racing?
I mean, I think as an athlete, there's a direct correlation between pain and performance to a point, right? Like as pain increases, as does performance. But as Ian was saying earlier, like to a point, you want to ride that line between going overboard. It's almost like a knife's edge in training and in racing, where if you push just that little bit too hard at one point of the race, it's going to have an impact later in the race. So it's finding that fine balance between the right amount of pain and too much pain. I think it's some trial and error. You do go over, and push a little hard sometimes. But yeah, I think in general, as pain increases, so does performance.
Yeah, it's inevitably, as Rinny said, isn't it? It's a key part of growth, but you've ultimately got to pay close attention to it. And I think communication, from a coach's perspective, is hugely important. So, for example, if we want to grow, and sometimes we have to push really hard, but we shouldn't be going too much. There's a collective amount of training stress that we should reach, but we shouldn't exceed that. So if somebody says on one morning, hey, I couldn't sleep last night because my legs were hurting so much, and then you do a quick review of everything, and there's been some exceeding of training, it's a huge problem. So you've got to kind of like jump on that quickly and make changes. So I think it's an accountability issue for me as a coach and for an athlete to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So look at what you're doing. And the phrase I use is do the right thing all the time, every time, no matter what, no matter who's looking, no matter who's around. As long as you do that, you generally will go in the right direction.
In athletes, it's actually an art, I guess. It's an art of managing that level of pain and be actually conscious that you are suffering with a purpose. your legs are hurting, your mind becomes less clear, your muscles start to hurt, etc. In startups, the way I would say it is, things are tough. Life is tough in general, and if it were easy, you wouldn't be progressing. So it's got to be, let's say when you're working with your scientists, your engineers, and there is no visual progress, but you're just trying and iterating and iterating and iterating, right? And you fail and you fail again. You are getting closer maybe to the answer of the question. No, so I guess it's iterations and painful iterations and tests and failures and stuff that actually make you bigger and closer to your end goal. We move on to the next block. Let's move on to the next block. It's the build. Let's get a little bit practical here. This is where pain turns into a system with purpose, not suffering only. So we are building rituals, rules, and red lines that let you hurt with purpose, no ego. So Rinny, what non-negotiables kept you going across years at the top? Was it family? Was it recovery rhythms, joy guards? What did you stop doing to keep the fire burning?
I don't know there's many things you stop doing as a professional athlete. And I think the biggest or the most important thing here is to keep the most important thing. And for me, every year, my big goal and what lit me up, what got me out of bed every day, what kept me excited, was winning that world title, and also just seeing what my capabilities as a professional athlete were. It was winning world titles, but it was also finding my limits. And so every year for me, I would sit down at the end of the year with my coach, and we would plan the year out meticulously with recovery time. I would make sure I had recovery built into the year from, October of World Championships of the year before to the next year. It's a long time and a long build. And I think it's really important to make sure you put some downtime in there where you can, it's not necessarily physically necessary, although it is helpful, I think. But for me, the mental side, being able to get up for that occasion required downtime throughout the year. And again, so I would take, after the World Champs, cut some time off. I really wouldn't be serious in training until, the end of December, January. I'd build through the first part of the year, and it'd be my early season. So wasn't really peaking, and then sort of hit some good races mid-year and take a mid-season break before my big build into the main race of the year. So I think what, didn't I do? I mean, I didn't neglect downtime. I made sure I took time away, usually with my husband, who is also a professional triathlete, and we would leave our bikes at home, our running shoes, and we would take a week in the middle of the year. And a lot of other athletes at that time were training really hard and logging another big week of training, and we would just not do that. And I think longevity that I had and we had in our career, I put it down to that, like making sure we built in some downtime. Because I think if it's all work all the time, you can get burnt out a lot quicker than maybe is necessary. And a week here or a week there, I understand, Tim, for you, sometimes there's crunch time and there's no option for downtime. There's no, it's go, it's now or never. But for us, because we had a regular cycle of the year, we could build in where we'd have that downtime. And I think that was key in, a 20-year triathlon career that was fairly successful.
Yeah, and if you don't take the downtime, your body will tell you at some point that you need to take it. Your hormones will be down to the floor, to the bottom. Your immune system will be destroyed, and then you will have to take, for sure, downtime. And
absolutely. And just to add to that, Ignacio, I mean, again, 20-year career, I never had an injury that took me out of the sport for more than a week, and never really had any chronic illnesses. So again, I think I just put it down to just planning and making sure you give your body the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, that speaks for itself. I can see Tim is nodding, and I actually see and speak and meet founders that don't consider success or progress without burnout. I mean, burnout is an innate state of being of many founders, and it ends up having a big cost. So Tim, in startups, we love scaling, we love growth, we love doubling the valuations, and this takes years. It's actually like an endurance sport, right? But many founders actually push the limits into the burnout. So you have particularly been quite open about going through this yourself. So what happened, and what did you put in place to recover, and what did you learn to come back stronger?
Yeah, so this is a topic that's really close to my heart, because I started myself, but also with many friends and other founders. Basically, you get trapped or tricked in treating the startup journey like a constant sprint, not an endurance sport where you recover, recharge, have a schedule, take care of yourself. And so you end up kind of pushing the limits constantly, never taking a break or putting your own oxygen mask first. You operate at like 150% until you crash, then you recover, you're on your knees, and then you repeat the cycle. And so you typically don't have a system, a coach, good practices. And so it's almost inevitable that you're going to burn out. And for me, for example, I was being a student at Cambridge University, had the idea for the startup, and you start the company, suddenly you raise some capital, there's a team. Now we've raised more than $100 million, but you've never been trained to do any of it. And so you learn on the fly. But I think the part that for me where I was really at breaking point was in 2022. I was completely burned out, and that was both from a professional perspective and personal perspective. And so what happened is we were scaling, and we were basically about to sign a $150 million investment round. We had the term sheet, things were ready to go. And at the beginning of 22, in January, the markets crashed. So the bubble burst, and we had one co-lead investor who pulled out. And then we went from $150 million to zero in about 2 weeks. And so as a result, we had to adapt. We had to fire more than 50% of the staff to just avoid bankruptcy. And that was really a hard time kind of on the professional side. But then at the same time, on the personal side, we just had a newborn baby, so a second child. And my wife was also facing severe mental health challenges. And so you're kind of firefighting at work all the time, and then at home it was actually even harder. And so the combination of the two without the right level of support meant that I was basically burned out. I kept going, but like from an energy and resilience perspective, I would have been going at 25-30%. And so in Ian's kind of traffic light system, I would have been red everywhere. But you kind of keep going, and you just do more of the same. And that's kind of the definition of stupidity, right? You know it's not right, and you're failing everywhere, but you just continue to do that. And then I think for me, I can honestly say it was probably one of the toughest years of my life, but also one of the most valuable ones, and in terms of personal growth and learnings. And so what happened is I was really lucky. We have great board and investors. And so a particular investor, Balderton Capital, they saw me struggle, but also other founders in their portfolio. And so they launched a scheme called the Wealth Founded Scheme with an incredible Dr. Jack Kreindler in London. And what they did was basically borrow the principles that Ian and Rinny are talking about here, and apply them to founders. And so they build a small team that follow a founder for 6 months. And there are people who used to work with Olympic athletes, high performance, champions, and then apply that in a data-driven way to a founder who basically knows nothing about all of this. And so you look at your diet, you look at your sleep, at your sport, you have the Oura ring, constant glucose monitoring. You really start looking at everything and try and build your own almost personal resilience manual in building breaks and recovery, which sounds obvious, right? When you talk to champions and top performance coaches, but that's the part that as a startup founder you don't learn, and you kind of learn on the fly. And so I think, yeah, for me there was the biggest learning was to kind of suddenly get this gift of personal resilience, understand for me what that manual is, and it's going to be different for everyone, and also give myself the permission to put my own oxygen mask on occasionally and not feel guilty about it. And so I think there were many learnings there and valuable lessons.
Very interesting, Tim, and thank you for sharing those emotions. What I read from what you're saying is that pain actually turned into a system with a purpose. It's difficult to say now. It's very difficult to understand it when you're going through that pain. And even if you're racing a marathon, let's say, it's very difficult to think fluidly. But I guess that's an art. That's something that you have to build with experience. And Tim, just final question for you. In hindsight, do you think all that was pain with a purpose?
For us, the mission of the company and really, like, I mean, some of the team members have children with the rare diseases we're trying to find a treatment for. And I think the sense of like the pain that I'm experiencing compared to their daily pain and stress, basically many of them have kind of won the genetic lottery in the opposite sense. And there's so many challenges around their journey. Typically it takes 10 years to get a diagnosis. Then they're being told that in 95% of the cases there is no treatment, and it impacts so many aspects of their life, including going to school, including care, basically. And so it kind of puts into perspective your own struggles, and even and it leads to you to burnout. And so I think this kind of purpose helped you go, but the challenge is, in a way, you want to avoid the burnout, and in another, this is where I really learned the most and build, like you say, turn the pain into a system and then ensure that it's never going to happen again. And so for me, when now there's a lot on, and right now there is a lot on, I carve out even more time. I'm more religious around my sport, my sleep, my diet, and I go kind of extreme. And so I would have loved to have someone like Ian, coach me along the journey.
Well, Tim, that is resilience. I mean, that is a very good definition, long definition of resilience. I'll do a parenthesis here, guys. I'll share something. I hope it's interesting with you. I don't know if you've watched the movie Alive. The plane that crashed in the Andes. It was a rugby team that was crossing the Andes from Paraguay to Argentina or something like that, and it crashed in the Andes. There's a beautiful movie called Alive, and one of the survivors actually gives speeches around because they had to walk in the glaciers up in the Andes to civilization to save themselves. And one thing he describes is something that I have actually taken for myself, which is the false summits. So when you think you have achieved a summit, and then all of a sudden there is a bigger mountain on top, and then you climb that mountain, and all of a sudden there's a bigger mountain, right? And how about the staying at the top of that mountain? No, when air is thin, when it's risky, when it's icy, when it's cold, all that, no? Yeah, so let's move on. Rinny, we say that miles 13 to 22 into the marathon are the real race, when most mistakes happen. And what's your mental protocol for the brutal middle, the cues that keep you there without flinching?
Yeah, I mean, well, for me, 13 to 22 or 15 to 26 was sort of my sweet spot. And as, an athlete with the strength in the run, I always sort of really leaned into that place in the race. So, 7 hours of racing has happened already to bring you to that spot. And that really is like the crucial part of the race, right? Like every decision that you've made prior to that moment is going to dictate what happens in that moment. Have you fueled well? Have you paced well? Have you been, wasting watts on the bike in different areas? Have you saved enough energy to be able to finish off the race well? And I think that's what I did fairly well in my career, making sure that I raced the duration of the race and didn't survive the last hour or so, which happens a lot in Ironman racing. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was when, the best part of the race, hardest part of the race, no doubt, for everybody. Just in terms of the time of day in Hawaii, the number of hours you've been out there just pushing. But yeah, I think being an athlete that generally did well in that circumstance, I almost grew in power as I ran along and past athletes, and that sort of mentality, I think serves you very well. Kind of believing that is where I come into my own. That part of the race is where I shine. And it wasn't something that I shied away from, even though it was the hardest part of the race. And yeah, I think, again, everything you do prior to that point sets you up for that point. So doing everything right, as Ian said, all the time, no matter what, gets you to a point, and then, you can enjoy somewhat the rest of the race if you've done a good job prior to it.
Well, as you were speaking, I was actually thinking of Healx. When they are doing everything right and they have no competitors, they are strong in what they do. It's actually quite easy to surpass and get to the finish line, right? Tim, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, in a strange way, we're pretty unique actually with our company applying AI to rare diseases and in what we do. One of our programs is actually a rare cancer, and that's a little bit different. And there actually we have AstraZeneca working on the disease, Pfizer, Novartis, Merck, all those big pharma companies. And basically they're all developing the same type of drugs, which are kinase inhibitors with a lot of side effects. But this particular cancer, basically, you have a rare mutation and you form benign tumors, which can turn cancerous. But what patients need is basically treatments for chronic use. And for chronic use for years on end, you ideally want basically a treatment with a good safety profile and basically very few or no side effects. And so what we did as a company was to use AI and try and find a small molecule that was targeted with very few side effects. And so and we've succeeded there. It is now in phase 2 clinical trials. And that's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it in terms of a potential cancer treatment with no side effects or almost none. That's a real therapeutic breakthrough. And then to your question, competition with others, etc. Well, we have almost every big pharma working on this particular cancer as well, and then it's a small biotech startup from Cambridge who makes a major breakthrough. So we're not worried on that sense, and it's nice to really being able to embrace those technologies to kind of think differently about those problems, not just because it's a particular cancer or tumor predisposition syndrome. Apply the same principles and come up with the same type of toxic cancer drugs.
This is a quick reminder that you are listening to Endurance Capital with me, Ignacio Garcia. We will be right back after a short word from the partners who helped make this series possible. One thing I've learned from athletes, coaches, founders, and everyone is that understanding your own biology is the real unlock. And that is exactly what Stride helps you do. It doesn't matter if you're a world-class athlete or someone just curious about how your body adapts when you train with intention. Stride brings you sessions, your data, and your goals into one place, so you actually see what's working and what isn't. If you're listening Endurance Capital today, you're already interested in doing things differently. So take a look at getstride.com and bring more clarity to how you train and how you operate day to day. Use coupon code Trampoline and we'll give you £100 off Stride 1 and 30% off any other individual Stride test or supplements. Yeah, Ian, we said earlier that pain needs to have a purpose. So if you're in the middle of a season, and how do you spot when the purpose disappears and all of a sudden you start seeing just pure suffering? And how do you intervene to save the season of that athlete?
That is an interesting question, and it happens more commonly than you would think. So one of the key things is to be, have your finger on the pulse at all times. So you have to know what's going on. So it does take a lot of communication and data analysis to make sure you know exactly what the situation is all the time. So, and the biggest thing is, like, how do you spot, toughness against, some, if somebody's so driven and their ego is so huge that they'll kind of push beyond what they should be doing, that's one of the things you kind of got to pay attention to, because ego is not your amigo. So ego is an emotional response to your environment. So it could be what people think of you, it could be what you think of yourself, it could be what your competitors think of you. So if you push yourself too hard in training, especially, and in racing, when you shouldn't do, when you should come outside of your pacing plan, then it's going to have a negative effect. So I'm constantly looking for visual cues to make sure that that's not happening when people actually push themselves too hard. Mood drops, compliance shifts, i.e. they're doing too much or they can't achieve the workouts. Data has a huge part in this. So we track so many different touch points using wearables. It's crazy these days. It's amazing. It's almost makes training easy, not easy, but easy kind of to predict. So that does help a ton. And my intervention is enforcing recovery. That's hugely important to back down, and that can usually save a season. So if somebody is pushing themselves too far, having the ability to go, okay, this is what we need to do, and making those changes, which some people find very, very difficult because they're so focused on those outcomes. What we tend to do is focus on the outcomes, and that therefore kind of blinds us to where we are in the moment. So being outcome focused is kind of important because you want to know what your goals are and where you're going, but staying in the moment is far more important. And it's a fine line. There is a lot of predictable data, but communication is super, super, super important. And you can push, and athletes can push, but they shouldn't be reckless whilst doing so. And if we need to back them down with prescription change, that's exactly what we should do. And it's up to me as a coach and the athlete as a team, we're absolutely a team, to make sure that we're accountable, both of us, to make sure that we are doing the right thing all the time, every time. What's also interesting is I've got all this information at my fingertips. I use all sorts of data analysis software, and I've developed my own basically graphs, etc., to extrapolate information that they use or they have to get this information. But ultimately, I don't know how an athlete feels. So that type kind of relationship that you have with an athlete is hugely important, because you can tell pretty quickly if something's not right, whether that's form changes, whether that's mood. You can get people who can be really moody because they're having a hard time or they're not sleeping. So these kinds of things make a huge difference. And actually, probably the three biggest performance inhibitors are stress, which could be environmental, it could be self-induced, it could be nutrition, which obviously the body can't fuel, and sleep. Those three things are usually the reasons why people don't execute well. That outside of not doing what they should be doing. So again, do the right thing all the time, every time.
Yeah, this reminds me, Rinny, of the race, just very briefly, the last race, women's race in Kona, when Breeze Charles Barkley actually made a decision on behalf of Lucy and decided to retire her. That's when pain is no longer with purpose, and it's just pure suffering without any objective, just you lose consciousness, you lose your purpose, etc. You agree? You seem to be agreeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that circumstance, Lucy was in the moment. She was certainly in pain, but there was no purpose to it anymore. She was clearly in a place where she could hurt herself. And I think to Tim's point earlier, that story you told, when you weren't putting your own oxygen mask on first and you had that burnout, that could have been, if Reese wasn't there to pull Lucy from the course, it could have been, end of season for Lucy. And in fact, he pulled her, devastating in the moment, absolutely. But she went on 4 weeks later to win the 70.3 World Championships. And so I think that's, definite, clear show of, when pain becomes, not purpose, but pain becomes just pain, with no gain in sight. So I think that's a great example there.
Yeah, and Tim, I was thinking about you. Unfortunately, you don't have that choice. You have to make your decision yourself. Unless if your wife actually makes that decision for you, then it's the end of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what's really interesting. And the topic and the people you bring together, Ignacio, is just a really, really, really nice and insightful. And so I can remember actually in 2022, so Suranga, who's a general partner at Balderton Capital, he had to chase me multiple times to join the program, the well-founded scheme. He was like, Tim, please, you look terrible. Join. And I was too busy. I didn't have the time. And so I don't have time for this, right? And so he had to kind of insist. So it's similar as the coach saying to the athlete, okay, no, it's time to stop. You're gonna, underperform or hurt yourself. And I think what's interesting at the time for me, when we had to go through the redundancies, etc., I kept going, but part of me thought, okay, that's it. We've lost the company. We're not going to bounce back. And actually, while this was hard, we've never been in a better position. And now we have way less people. We're high performing. We're super focused. We get the sense of purpose. And so we've never done better. I've never enjoyed. This is the most enjoyable part of the journey. And we've been going for a number of years. And so that's kind of counterintuitive, that something that brought in so much pain, but then also so many learnings. And then the decisions that we had to make was tough. So as a founder, you're like, okay, we need to fire more than 50% of the staff. The markets crash, people are losing jobs, and then Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And then you have to decide, all the options are terrible, basically. And if you don't fire people, you go bankrupt and everybody loses their job. And then these people I know really closely, right? I know their wives, partners, their kids, and it's really, but I think be able to take a step back and then make those decisions with intention and purpose, it really helps. But that's why I think the amount of pain, there's a lot of also emotional pain, which also you will have in with athletes, etc. And there I think that was for me the hardest, was kind of knowing that all the options are terrible. I'm gonna choose the least bad one, and then the one where I believe we have the highest likelihood of bouncing back, and in the end it's the best thing that happened to the company, actually, because we're doing so well right now. But it was really tough from a mental perspective to know that the impact of the families and the employees and the stuff in the decision that you were forced to make, given the conditions.
Yeah, I guess, Ian, whether it's on a training year, a training season, or just on the specific on a race, I guess when you are on the verge of losing that purpose and on the verge of pain becoming suffering, I guess what may save you is mental toughness. And, having gone through that process of understanding the difference between the two, is that something you can learn, or you're born with?
It's kind of a bit of both. So mental toughness is a blend of both innate predisposition and learned skills. So you may have that. You may have been brought up having that and develop that through your parents, etc., or your experiences, but you need to finely tune it, especially if you want to operate at a high level. I use a system which is it's basically the exposure, reflection, reinforcement, recovery method, which I'll go through that real quickly. So that basically gives us helps us have an understanding of what we're doing. So it makes sure we can actually, and it's a process that just goes round and round and round, almost like an OODA loop. So the exposure part is the challenge. You're intentionally stepping outside of your comfort zone, exposing yourself to difficult, uncomfortable situations, but in a controlled manner. So mental muscle training is probably the best way of explaining it. So for example, that's like taking on a really physically demanding workout or practicing a new skill, that you're not used to, because there's so much low-hanging fruit in sport where people just focus on training and don't go outside the box and just work on those little small things which actually get together and yield kind of big results. And the goal is to succeed, but to try not to just to succeed, but to try and get comfortable with being uncomfortable in that process. The next thing then is to reflect, so you analyze. So after you've done the challenging experience, you engage in self-reflection, process that information with your coach. And what happens is it builds a self-awareness and extracts so many valuable lessons from that experience. So for example, you can go out and, ask yourself, what did I learn today? Don't just do a workout and be a passenger. It's a huge thing I impress on athletes is instead of being a passenger in the race, you're not just in the race, you want to be an activist. You want to have an effect on your competitors, but you also want to make sure you're doing everything you can to set the conditions for your success. So you need to reflect on that once you've done like a challenging practice, whether it's skill or whether it's intensity or whatever the case may be. And then you want to ask yourself, what frustrated me, what went well, and take that away, analyze those mistakes. And those are areas of opportunity then. You can actually put in implementations and interventions to make sure that you improve next time. So never repeat the same mistake. People do that in races too. So, and that reinforces an awesome growth mindset. Like you're constantly improving all the time. I call them coaching points. When I develop a session and I give that to an athlete, I give them a ton of things to think about. And this is part of the process. And then, like we talked about I can't remember which episode it was, we talked about the belief process where you be bold, repeat being bold, repetition creates belief. Belief creates confidence. Confidence enables control. Once you're in control, you can develop capability. Is reinforcement, the habit formation. So your repetition. So you use the insights that you've gained, the reflection that you've done with your coach and by yourself. Like you literally have to take ownership of your own progress and direction and develop more future concrete strategies and developing new habits combined with the data that's kind of brought up to make, again, set those conditions for success. And there's a ton of ways to do this. So you can do positive self-talk. You can compartmentalize. So you can look at how things have gone and you can put them into smaller blocks so that when you go and execute the next session or a race, you can give yourself micro goals. Okay, I want to execute this part of the race really well. It didn't go well last time. I want to execute this session really, really well. It didn't go that well last time. These are the things that I need to work on. And this is the communication I've had with my coach to enable that to happen. And then goal setting, like in its full form. So you've gone through micro goals. By the time you've gone over the whole thing, you've got more of a bigger picture of what you're trying to achieve, keeping them goals smart all the time. The final stage of that is the recovery process, which is the foundation. So it's basically the critical need for rest and recovery. So despite you put yourself in a challenging workout or in a race, you've got to make sure that you can super compensate from it so that you can progress. And the next time you repeat that process or you come into another event or you do another session, you've actually grown. Your body's enabled super compensation to happen. So prioritizing sleep, healthy nutrition, hydration, reflecting on efficiencies, whether that's in pedal stroke, run form, swim technique, all sorts of other things, even, and then the tactical side of it, where you place yourself in the pack, where you place yourself in the swim, etc. How you actually use your pedal stroke. It's not just getting on a bike and turning those chain sets, those pedals around. It's really thinking about where I'm pulling, where I'm pushing, and dialing that in so it just becomes proprioception. And that then, combined with the rest and recovery, recharging your emotional batteries, spending time with family, distracting from the sport, hugely important. Many athletes who just focus on their life is sport, and that is it. And every time you have a conversation, it's sport, triathlon, and I'm like, no, like let's move away from this and bring in something else to refresh and recharge those batteries as much as possible.
Let's talk a little bit about translating the playbook. No? Finding meaning in pain, what founders, investors, and performers, athletes can build into the weeks. Ian, I see founders giving it all like if there is no tomorrow. They don't perceive success without burnout. Can you give perhaps our audience, our founders' audience, a 3-question scan to decide whether to back off, change the task, or stop completely when the system is screaming, stop, stop, stop?
The best way I would frame this is I would use a 3-question set, but I would also divide those each questions into 4 sub-questions. So the first one is like, is what I'm doing, is the process that I am, is it screaming, i.e. is it working, or am I just tired? So the first step to differentiate that is between personal fatigue and genuine data-backed signals about whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the market, whether it's sport, is actually working or not. And it could be you just hitting a wall in your progress, or it could be burnout. So you need to differentiate between the two. Is it screaming? Am I just tired? And so the sub-questions in that are, ask yourself, what specific quantifiable metrics indicate failure? So you need to know what you're doing and your area of expertise is that actually indicating failure, or is it something else? And then back off if. Ask yourself that question too. So can you point to hard data to say that whether something is going in the right direction or not, or is that not the case? But you also need to go by feel in here, and you'll know because you'll have a general feeling of dread or burnout. Like, it's a very physical thing. So the issue might just be the need for rest and recovery, and it might not be a strategic failure. It might just be something that you need to take some time off to prevent burnout, whether it's as a founder or as an athlete. And then you just change the task. So pivot, basically. So ask yourself the question, is everything going in the right direction? Back off if, and then change the task and pivot if you need to. So if you have a clear, quantifiable data that's showing you that something is failing and it's not going in the right direction, change it. Like, why would you continue on that task? It's just lunacy to do so. So do that. And then if you need to stop completely, it's if you're repeatedly hitting key milestones and there's a zero positive effect. So if you're, for example, for an athlete, if they're doing workouts and the collective nature of those workouts together, and they're almost like not progressing, or they're feeling worse, then we need to stop. And that's when we come in with a recovery process. The next big question is like, you need to ask yourself this. So this is in terms of like, how and what am I going to invest in? So for me as an athlete, if I'm looking at something, and this happens with some athletes, especially people who are developing, probably not champions at this stage, people who are looking at where they lie in the pecking order of performance, because there's people who are absolute champions and there are people who really good athletes, but they never quite get there. If I had everything in my means today, would I continue on this path? Would I continue on this current plan? And that could be a coach change. That could be a team change. That could be anything. It could be not even continuing on this path in the sport. But it's the same in business. If I had the money, let's say $1 million, to continue on this path with this current plan that I'm on right now, would I continue to do so? And then go through those 4 questions yourself. Ask yourself, does your current strategy seem sound? Does it have high potential? Is it free from stress and everything else that comes with running a sports team or a business? Do I need to back off if your answer is hesitant, then yes, you need to probably back off. You may need to pivot if you say no and the plan is itself might look like a problem. So again, you're going to pivot, and you need to stop completely if you can strongly say, no, I can put all the money into the world into this plan, and it's probably not going to go in the direction I want. The same with, I can put everything into this as an athlete, and I'm not going to get the outcome that I want. I don't have the prerequisites. And then the third question would probably be how to phrase this better, but is what I'm going through right now temporary? Is this just a lull in the battle? Is this just a bump in the road? And is it going to be something that I'm going to maintain momentum in what I want to achieve or not? So again, you ask yourself the same things. Are the struggles I face typical in what I'm doing? Is this normal for what I'm doing as an athlete? Is this normal for what I'm doing in business? There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be things you need to look at in the dynamics of the environment you're in. Ask yourself, are these struggles that I'm facing solvable hurdles? And then back off. Again, go back to that same question. And back off if it's related to, solvable operational problems, or it's just a question of grit and resistance, and potentially, it's just something I need to back off from. And then change if you need to. So if it's not going in that direction, change it, and stop completely if it's like a perpetual struggle that is rooted in what you're doing is not going in the right direction. So that might require an absolute exit strategy from either, the sport or from what you do in this business.
When you're in the middle of the season and you're training hard, you're racing at the same time, what's one ritual that reduces noise from your purpose, anchors your belief, gets your refocus?
Yeah, I think for me, a big ritual, there's lots of different rituals you kind of do without even thinking. But when I thought about this a little bit, I think the biggest one was visualization, ahead of races, carving out time where I could sit in silence, and it was always almost meditative, where I would, in a race situation, sit down and go from, the moment I wake up in the morning, go through in my mind every little detail of every little thing that I need to do to get myself to that start line ready to go. And then go through the race from start to finish. How do I want it to play out? What could happen? Like different scenarios. So that when you wake up that morning, you've already gone through the whole thing in your mind. It's almost like you're on autopilot then. And I think that just helps you avoid so many mistakes that you could make. Forgetting a pair of shoes, not having enough nutrition on your bike, and just like having that mental space to play every scenario out in your mind so that when a scenario arises in a race, you're not surprised or taken back by it, and you have a plan in place to help deal with that emotion and that feeling. Okay, well, this plan A happened. This is what I do. Plan B, this is what I do. So I think visualization is just such a big, important piece of, a lot of things. But for me, when I was racing, just carving out that time was invaluable before every single race.
Yeah, and for you, Tim, we are talking about in this blog about the playbook and turning lessons into, practices. When you think about 2022 and all the pain you went through, what's the most valuable lesson you learned from pain that you might be, luckily applying today to save you from similar circumstances?
For me, there was kind of, as I shared before, giving me permission to take care of myself and prioritize myself. When you have like many employees in the company, shareholders, patient groups, young kids, partner, basically you end up kind of prioritizing everyone else. And actually, if you flip it on its head and put your own oxygen mask first. And so what I do in my calendar is I block things out. There I go swimming. There I do some yoga. Here I'm going to take a rest. I go to sleep between 9:45 and 10:15. And I know kind of in detail if I need to be at kind of high performance, high resilience, like an athlete would do before a race. So, and I prioritize this first. And so I put those blocks in my calendar, and then the rest has to fit in. And I don't compromise on it anymore. And so that's, I used to feel guilty about not saying yes to everything and not prioritizing everyone else. But I think the learning for me is that I'm going to be a much better CEO, a much better dad, a much better partner, a much better colleague. And so if I do take a bit of time to also prioritize myself, and then the learning of, if we take sleep, for example, and again, that's with a coach and a team, we looked at so many different aspects. What happened to my sleep scores with my Aura Ring if we put background noise, if I put earplugs, if we open the window, if I take a shower before, if I take some magnesium. And so I know basically exactly when to go to sleep, what to do before as a ritual, if I want to end up with 90 to 95% sleep scores, and then everything else fits into place. And so that's just one example. We did the same with my diet, with blood samples, with supplements, and I think I was incredibly fortunate to be able to be in a position, have also forward-thinking investors who realize that, of course, if the CEO burns out, they're gonna waste a lot of money, but also they care about their founders and their well-being. And so giving permission, receiving permission from my board and investors to actually take care of myself, join a program for 6 months, get me back on track. I think I won the well-founded award, because basically I was the person who arrived in the worst possible shape and then got out in the best one. So it's a type of award I really don't want to win, but I think, very, very grateful. And maybe my message to founders is just like, don't feel guilty about prioritizing yourself. Like the rest will fall into place if you do.
I think for the last 15 years, I decided to dedicate the first 3 hours of the day for me. So if you want to put yourself a meeting at 8, you know what you have to do. You have to wake up at 4:30 in order to have 3 hours for yourself. And those hours, you can do whatever you want. You can play the saxophone, and you can meditate. You can go for a run, even a cycle and a swim. It allows you get good nutrition. You read a book, whatever that is. And I would say I do it more than 50% of the time, and that pays off, because you get to your meeting or whatever fresh, strong. That's my take, and that's why when we go to Zermatt, we have an hour and a half meditation every day. So if we kick off at 8:00 in the morning, then that means we have to do the 5:30 meditations, and Tim actually experienced that. Well, you experience it from the distance,
meditating
from your
bed.
bedroom. From your bedroom. We are talking about translating pain or going through pain and finding the purpose as if it is a lonely task. The founder is on his own or her own. The athlete is alone, and it's not. I mean, it's a team. No, Ironman racing is not an individualistic sport. It's a team sport. Although there is somebody that is the main character, not the athlete. But my take is that you're never alone. There is always a coach, a physio, a nutritionist, even a friend or a partner. There's always a team behind you. So like when you are building a startup, if there's no team, then I would question myself, what am I doing? What's the whole purpose, right? So what's the smallest culture change for you guys? Ian, maybe you can go first. The smallest culture change a team can make to normalize honest conversations about pain.
Absolutely, and culture is kind of one of those things which facilitates success. It's huge, especially the team element. And I spend a lot of time mentoring other coaches and developing good, positive cultures to enable that to happen. But to normalize talking about pain, especially when it comes to having your finger on the pulse to make sure things are going in the right direction, is communication. Like, you've got to make sure that the team surrounding the athlete is all talking together and all on the same page. Because one person might see something that another one doesn't. So if you've got like a strength coach who's awesome, they may see something that I don't see, or like a specific single modality sports specialist might not see, or a physiologist or whatever else. So weekly, or at least whatever is practical, getting together, meetings as a team, and also together, sometimes without the athletes, so you can actually talk very frankly, because obviously the psychological aspect of things is very important, and with the athlete, so you can develop strategies, and then you can actually come in with a strategy and give options, and then everyone's on the same page, everyone's drinking the same Kool-Aid, and the ecosystem moves far more fluidly because there's no surprises. Athlete doesn't all of a sudden wake up with a problem. It works so well. So scheduling very clear, very honest and open dialogue.
Tim, and for you, what's the smallest culture change a team can make to normalize honest conversations about pain?
For me, for a long time, I thought I had to basically protect the team from the pain and the challenges, and that I had to kind of take it on myself. And I think now the approach has been very different, and kind of being open with the team, also with some of the challenges were at home, and be open with them, be like, okay, this is the cash in the bank. We're expecting to get 150 million, didn't come. So unless we do take XYZ decisions, we basically go bankrupt. And that's kind of being open about that, open about my burnout. It gives also them the permission to basically try and struggle well and be open, and also put their own oxygen mask first. And I think that's really important in building a culture where actually that's acceptable, right? It's one of my investors who set up a scheme for their founders, because they see one founder burn out after the other, and then they think, well, Olympic champions, they kind of perform all the time. So what can we learn from there and apply this to the startup journey? A podcast like this one, where you can be open about also the challenges and the moments that were tough, and then share that with others. I think it kind of creates a culture that really allows people to struggle in a better way and be a better version of themselves.
We're getting close to the end. Quick fire to each of you to wrap this. Please, short answers. So I raise a question, and then each one of you can reply. We'll start with Rinny. The most painful moment, and what kept you going?
Probably for me, 2012 Kona. I lost my nutrition at the start of the bike and paid for it on the run. But what kept me going was self-respect and finishing what I started.
Tim?
Yeah, for me, my burnout in 2022, and what kept me going was the mission of the company, and a bit of insanity.
Ian, and for you, maybe about an athlete, without mentioning the name?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a few stories, but positively is unfortunately seeing others not adhere to good recovery protocols and then getting themselves hurt and then still pushing on instead of backing down.
Rinny, one thing that people always get wrong about endurance.
I think people think endurance and they think it's physical, and it's absolutely not true. It's also neurological, emotional, and your brain learns pacing, rhythm, and discomfort tolerance. So training literally rewires how your brain interprets like for endurance and fatigue.
I love it. Tim?
Yeah, I think for startup founders, the misconception is that it's basically a constant sprint. And if you're not 24/7 working on the startup, you're not committed and da-da-da. But basically, it really is an endurance sport. And so listen to podcasts like this one and try and approach it differently, because it is a long journey. It's a rewarding one, but you're going to burn out if you don't take care of yourself.
100% agree.
Yeah, that it's not about going harder for longer. It's about patience, listening to the body, and just not using data all the time. Like it's great because it gives you so much information, but how an athlete feels is critical.
Now, final one, Rinny, finish the sentence for me. Pain becomes progress when
you turn up and face it year after year, to a point.
Okay, and Tim, pain becomes progress when
when you have a strong sense of purpose and you kind of accept that it's part of the journey and stop fighting it and try and embrace it.
And Ian, pain becomes progress when
you perform. You perform when you recover effectively and learn to back off and accept the signs.
Real toughness is quiet, consistent, and intelligent. It's not blind push. It's clarity with a cost. But before we go, where can people find you guys? A little bit more about you and your work. Rinny.
Yeah, I'm a coach. We have a team, Salty Bears Racing. I also do commentary for IRONMAN, so you can hear me on all of the IRONMAN Pro Series races.
Excellent. And Tim, where can people find you and learn more about you?
So the website is Healx.ai, and you can find things there. And then I'm gonna probably reach out to Rinny and Ian to get some additional coaching for the journey.
Yeah, and Ian, how about you?
You can get me on LinkedIn as Ian O'Brien and Instagram as Ian O'Brien Coaching.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Pain is unavoidable in racing, in building companies, and in life. What separates those who break from those who progress is the system they build around it. Red lines, recovery, and purpose. If you are in the brutal middle right now, I hope this conversation helped you reframe what you're feeling and use it instead of fighting it. Thank you, Rinny, for showing us how a world champion thinks. And thank you, Tim and Ian, for joining us today. Next time on Endurance Capital, we open the engine room. What if endurance isn't just mental, but biological? What if understanding your own data could extend how long you perform at a high level? We will talk longevity, lifespan, and what elite athletes and founders can learn from people who live past 110 years. We will speak with Natalie Coles, who has studied the blood of super centenarians, and Will Harvon, founding partner of Long Game Ventures, investing in the next revolution of longevity. Hit subscribe to be notified when it's available. Stride helps you make sense of your data, see how your body actually adapts, and bring more intention to your life and to your sessions. As a listener, you can use code Trampoline for £100 off Stride 1 and 30% off any other individual Stride tests or supplements. If you're exploring what's possible, Stride gives you a clearer map. Visit getstride.com and keep moving with purpose. Endurance Capital is brought to you by Trampoline Venture Partners. Special thanks to our guests, the champions, the founders and coaches who share their stories so openly, and to the growing Endurance Capital community around the world. This series is made possible through production by One Fine Play and the support of our sponsor, the Stride Health. If you found this episode useful, you can follow and share Endurance Capital wherever you get your podcasts, and learn more about Trampoline and the Trampoline Zermatt Summit on LinkedIn. The link is in the show description. I'm your host, Ignacio Garcia, and this is Endurance Capital.